have met Joseph before in this series. In a previous episode, we read his story through Carl Jung, the coat of many colors, the dream that made his brothers hate him, the pit, the sail, the long journey through slavery and prison, and to the palace of Pharaoh. We read that story as an individuation journey, the way the self sometimes pulls us through darkness to a wholeness we could not have reached in any other way. In this episode, I want to return to Joseph, not to the descent, but to the return, to the moment in Genesis 45 when the years of separation come to an end, when the man who was thrown into the pit stands before the brothers who threw him in a position of total power and has to decide what he is going to do. We read that moment today with John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who spent his career understanding what happens to human beings when their attachments are severed and what becomes possible when they are, against all expectation, repaired. Bowlby's attachment theory begins with a simple but radical claim. The need for close emotional bonds with other people is not a secondary drive derived from something else, such as hunger or sexuality. It is a primary biological need, as fundamental as the need for food or shelter. Human beings are wired for attachment. We need to be held, noticed, responded to, valued by specific others. When these bonds are secure, we explore, we risk, and we grow. When they are severed, we suffer in specific, predictable ways. Bowlby identified three phases in the response to prolonged separation from an attachment figure: protest, despair, and detachment. The child who is separated from their primary caregiver first cries and reaches out. That's the protest. Then falls into grief and withdrawal. That's the despair. And if the separation continues long enough, develops a kind of defended self-sufficiency, detachment, in which the longing for the lost figure is suppressed and the self reorganizes around the assumption that the bond cannot be restored. The third phase, detachment, is the most psychologically significant and the most difficult to reverse because the detached person has done something necessary for survival. They have stopped expecting what they need. They have learned to live without. And the cost of this learning is that they can no longer easily receive what, in other circumstances, they desperately want. Joseph's years in Egypt are, in Bowlby's framework, years of detachment. The boy who was thrown into the pit, who must have cried out to his brothers as they sat and ate bread and did not listen, could not survive the experience by remaining in protest or despair indefinitely. He had to reorganize. He had to become someone who could function without his father's house, without the coat, without the place in the family he had been given and then stripped of. He becomes extraordinary. He rises through every system that contains him: Potiphar's household, the prison, the court of Pharaoh. He interprets dreams with uncanny accuracy. He administers Egypt through 7 years of plenty and into the famine. He is, by any external measure, successful beyond any reasonable expectation. But Bowlby would ask, at what cost? What does the detached person carry beneath the success? The longing that has been suppressed is not dead. It is alive and waiting. The brothers come to Egypt for grain. They don't recognize Joseph. He recognizes them. And the text tells us carefully that he turns away from them and weeps. Not once, but repeatedly, across several encounters, as he tests them and delays the revelation. Bowlby would see in these tears the return of what was suppressed, the attachment longing, held back for years, held back by necessity, held back by the extraordinary demands of his life in Egypt. It surfaces in the presence of the brothers. Even the people who sold him can produce tears because they are connected to what he lost. They are the ones who were there when everything was severed. He asks them about their father. Is the old man still living? He cannot stop asking about Jacob. And when he finally cannot contain himself any longer, when Benjamin, his full brother, Rachel's other son, is present and the longing is too great, he clears the room of all the Egyptians and weeps loudly enough that the Egyptians hear it in the next room. And he says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? And the brothers cannot answer him because they are terrified. This is the moment Bowlby would find most psychologically precise. The reunion, when it comes, is not simple. The brothers are not simply relieved, they're terrified because the person standing before them is the one they wronged, and he has the power of life and death over them and their families. Bowlby's later work on loss and bereavement was particularly attentive to what he called complicated mourning, the grief that cannot simply flow because it is entangled with guilt or anger or shame. The brothers have been carrying the weight of what they did to Joseph for 20 years. They have watched their father mourn. They have lived with the knowledge of what they concealed and could not undo. And now Joseph is here, and he is weeping. Joseph says to them, come close to me. And when they do, he says, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It was not you, but God who sent me here. This sentence, it was not you, but God who sent me here, has puzzled and moved readers for millennia. It seems, on one reading, to simply exonerate the brothers. It was God's plan. You were instruments. Don't worry about it. But Bowlby would read it differently. He would not say this is a denial of what happened or a suppression of the injury. He would say this is what genuine repair looks like when the person who is injured is also the person who has the power to determine whether repair is possible. Joseph is not pretending that the pit didn't happen, or that the sale wasn't real, or that 20 years of separation were not a loss. He is doing something more remarkable. He is finding a frame large enough to hold both the injury and the gift. The thing that destroyed him also made him. The loss that he was unable to prevent turned out to be the path to something he could not have reached any other way. This is not naive forgiveness that costs nothing. It is the forgiveness that becomes possible only after the full experience of the loss, after the protest and the despair and the long years of detachment has been genuinely metabolized. Joseph could not have said this the day after he was sold. He can say it now, not because the pain is gone, but because the pain has been transformed by everything that came after it. He falls on his brother Benjamin's neck and weeps. And Benjamin weeps on his neck, and he kisses all his brothers and weeps over them. After that, his brothers talk with him. After that, the talking comes after the weeping. The words come after the body has done what the body needed to do. Bowlby understood this sequence, the physical reunion before the verbal processing, the embrace before the explanation, as reflecting something true about the biology of attachment. The attachment system is not a cognitive system, it is a bodily one. And what it needs first is not understanding, but presence, contact, the restoration of the broken bond in the most fundamental way, being in the same room, close enough to touch. They weep, they hold one another, and then they talk. The oldest human story of separation and return, and it ends here in Egypt, with the brothers of Joseph weeping in the palace of the man they sold, who turns out to have been waiting for them all along.